I'm going to start with the history of Israel. And then I'm going to throw some maps here and show you what you guys, most of the schools I've been in didn't teach it. Even in college, they didn't teach it. They just kind of conveniently leave all this out. So don't think if you go to the right university, honestly, even in Israel, they leave most of the Israeli history out. But just to start out, the first character we see is Abraham, or Abram as he was called, and we know he comes out of this place called Ur, and that's to me not a very exciting town. Where do you live? Ur. Okay. But it's the place in Babylonia, and where that is it's along the Euphrates River. So from there they move to Haran, and from there they get involved with a group called the Amorites. Now here's what's important. Don't confuse the Amorites of Abram's day with the Amorites later on. Amorite was a term that simply meant people of the West. They were Semitic people, spoke a very similar language to the Hebrews, and they got along. In fact, we see in one place in the Bible where the confession is, when you go into Passover, that I was a wandering Amorite. Okay, that's where that's from. Not the same Amorites they fought with later. So it's just like it's a huge group of people, basically just referring to all the people. So when we get to, we're in ancient times. We're back like 2000 BC. Okay, 2000 BC. From about 2000 BC to 1700 BC, Egypt controlled what we call Israel today, controlled all of what's called Palestine today, controlled what's called Jordan today. They were the big boys on the block, okay? They control that. But here's the way they did it. It was very interesting. You know where Egypt is? Egypt is down below Israel, okay? And so they did it not by micromanaging. They learned way back not to micromanage. People have forgot that today. But they did it what was called city-states. They had trade with all these countries that we would call Syria, Cyprus, Crete, and these city-states. And a city-state is a place it's just kind of there. We're a city. We govern our own self. We're not trying to make war with anybody. We're not trying to have an army or anything. We just want to defend our city, and we want to live in our city, and we want to trade with everybody. We just want to get along. And so Egypt was good with that, and so they were the big boys. Like, as long as you're not trying to take territories and expand, I'm good with that. Remember this term, because you're not taught this in school. Transjordan, okay? Transjordan is where Israel as we know it today came from. It's real important to understand it. So the part that's called Transjordan is all of Jordan and all of Israel today. Okay, all of it. Big place. I'm going to show you a map in a minute. They didn't operate under the city system. They operated under a tribal system. So you see all these nomadic tribes in there. The Bedouins today were part of that. A lot of nomadic tribes in there. It's how they operate. The Hebrews are recorded in ancient history in secular writing in multiple places, and they show up as it's spelled these two ways, Hebrew, with Hebrew or Apru. It's in Mesopotamian writings, it's in Egyptian writings, it's in Syrian writings. So we're back in about 1800, 1900 before Messiah. 1800, 1900 BC, this concept of Hebrew was around. Now we can't particularly, in all these writings where they're mentioned, it's just generic. So we don't really see anybody that we can identify. And it's just talking about generic stuff, about these people that were there when whatever happened. They're not like a major source. We know they were around is all we can really say about that. They are, like I say, they are a part of what was called, this is a historical statement, that they are part of what was called the Wandering Arameans. Well, they didn't get this from the Bible. This is historical. So everything I'm showing you, none of this is from the Bible. This is from secular history. Everything I'm showing you. To be honest, some of it's a dead copy, including that phrase. Okay, I didn't write any of that. They says they spoke the Semitic language, so that was the language of the times. And then what do? They end up in Egypt, because today's Torah portion is about them coming out of Egypt. And so I wanted to talk about the history before that, how they got to Egypt and how they're going to come out of Egypt and end up in Israel. And then there's somebody going, they took our land. Is that true? That's what we want to find out. So we find out that they were basically nomads who ended up in Egypt. There's a group of strange people that nobody, especially that everybody scratches their head over who they are. They're called the Hyksos in history. Matthew talks about him. He's a historian. I have struggled with these people along with every other person that's ever looked at this for years. I've wrestled with them. I've thought for sure that Israel was the Hyksos. I've actually changed my mind. I think I've got it. See if this makes sense. Because you've heard me teach both sides of it. I've been all over the place on this one trying to sort it out. In Egypt, they're dynasties. Okay? The Pharaoh has a son, he takes over. He has a son, he takes over. He has a son. We see the same thing going on in Jordan. You know, you see it in any places that have these kings even today. And so think about this, and this was the struggle. So you got this guy comes in, okay, he's really smart, he's Joseph, he can, you know, he can see the future, and he's really smart. Why would you risk your dynasty? Why would you risk your throne putting this guy in charge? What king's son would risk that? Because they know that they're vulnerable to takeover. I'm thinking that the Hyksos had actually taken over. They're a wandering, powerful warrior tribe. And Egyptian history simply says they were there. They don't say much about them. They don't say anything about the Hebrews. They don't say anything about them because a couple of times here it appears they got their butt kicked. And when you're writing your own history, you don't mention those things, okay? The only place that does that is the Bible. The Bible, the story, it just tells it like it is. Good, bad, and ugly, it's all in there. So take this, for example. The Hyksos come into Egypt. They take over physically. Do they know how to run this place? Not a clue. They're wandering people. They've never run anything like this. They're also called shepherd kings. So if they could have got that name later, but think about it. If the Hebrews, if they kind of join with the Hebrews, say, this guy's smart, he's on our side, he will help us. Are the Egyptians going to help them? They're the enemy. They've just taken over by power. They're not going to help them. But Joseph's already in jail. They get him out of jail. He finds out this guy's really smart. Let's get him to help us. Okay? I think it's a reasonable possibility. Either way, they end up there. And then what does happen? In the Bible, it says, and another king who knew not Joseph. So Egyptian history says that after the Hyksos, the original dynasties took back over. Think about that. In other words, the lineage that knew they were supposed to be the kings, the pharaohs, they took over. They defeated, history says they defeated the Hyksos. So would not Joseph and everybody got kicked out or taken slavery at that time? So there's a war, I think, happens there, a takeover, a powerful takeover. And that's how this other king, who, you know, it's like, and that's actually probably one of the original pharaohs. That's just my guess. But the point is, here's the point is, we start talking about Palestine. Okay, you've heard this. There has never been in history, listen to me, there has never been in history, anywhere in history, a country called Palestine. Okay, doesn't exist. If you consider today, and this is historically, if you consider Palestine to be a sovereign, independent country that goes back through recorded history, as some people believe, then we have to answer these questions. And I want y'all to memorize these questions, because ask somebody this and they start with that. When was Palestine founded and by whom? It actually wasn't. Oh, good answer. 1967. We'll get to that. Where are its borders? What was the borders of the ancient Palestine? Doesn't exist. What was its capital? It never existed. There is no country, there is no border, there is no capital, and there was never a president, and there was never a king of Palestine, and it never had a government because it doesn't exist. What were the major cities of Palestine? None. They don't exist. And what was its economy about? And here's the real question. Who was its leader before Yasser Arafat in 1967? You see, there was a terrorist named Yasser Arafat, okay, who they couldn't figure out how to deal with him, so they decided to talk to him. We had some liberal presidents at the time who decided that the best thing to do with the terrorists was embrace them and kiss them. And so he had been this terrorist leader in the 60s. He aligned himself actually with, is he going to get along with Israel? No, he hates Israel. He's bombing it. Does he like America? No, he hates America. So who's he going to align himself with? They're enemies. The enemies of Israel and the enemy of America. Who was the enemy, the arch enemy of America and Israel in the 1960s? Soviet Union, the communist, atheist Soviet Union. Their official religion was atheism. They would actually destroy you, put you in prison if you taught the Bible. Okay, that's who they were dealing with. So that's who it was. In 1967, there was a war called the 6-Day War. And so here's the question. In that war, so they're called the 6-Day War, Did Israel annex territory from the Palestinian nation? Because that's what's been said today. So if this is true, then we have an issue. If it's not true, so this is one of the questions. So did they? Actually, no. They did not take a single inch of territory from Palestine because there is not, and there never has been, a Palestinian nation to take it from. It simply doesn't exist. Israel did. This is what Israel actually did. Y'all ready? Israel captured the territory that's called the West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem from Jordan. That's who owned it. No Palestine. Jordan owned it. And they took it. In fact, they went so far as they even took Temple Mount. And when they gave it back, they really didn't give it back. They said, we're going to hold it, but since it's holy to you guys too, we're going to let Jordan run it. To this day, they let Jordan run it. If there was a Palestinian nation, wouldn't they have let the Palestinians run it? They don't exist. It's run by a group called the Waqif, which are Jordanians. Okay, so they captured the West Bank territories from Jordan, and the Gaza Strip they captured from Egypt. Okay, and why did they do that? Because Jordan and Egypt declared war against the Jewish state, against Israel, for the second time. They actually did it the first time in 1948. But in 67, they did it again. In 73, they did it again. And they keep getting their butt kicked. And they go, like, sometimes people don't learn. Right? It's like, God might be on those people's side. We outnumber them 100 to 1, but we still can't. So, was Palestine ever recognized by a country whose existence at that time or now leaves no room for interpretation? In other words, if there was a real country called Palestine, there should have been another country that recognized it, put their embassy there, or did something, right? Actually, there's not recorded anywhere in history that anybody ever recognized or acknowledged a nation called Palestine. It doesn't exist. What was the language of the country of Palestine? Why don't the Palestinians speak Palestinian? They actually speak Arabic. Arabs are from Arabia. That's why they speak Arabic. Jews are from Judea. Okay? This is not hard stuff. What is the religion of this so-called country of Palestine? It doesn't exist. What's the currency? What's the exchange rate against some currency? Somewhere there. It doesn't exist. Okay? And so all these things, yeah, and if there was such a country, what caused it to, whatever happened to it, It's actually just a generic collection of Arabs from all of the rest of the Arab world, and that's just who they are, and there was no even a thought of trying to become an independent nation inside of Israel until they got a devastating defeat in the 1967 war. Okay. This is from a historian. He's an Arab. He's a Muslim. Al-Ghani Salami. This was on Palestinian television, the official Palestinian Authority television, November the 1st, 2017. Listen what he said. He's talking about, he gets a question about the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which set up the idea of, this is from, Balfour is a British subject. He was a historian, statesman, and he came up with this idea. It's like, look, we've got this giant land that we don't want anymore. Okay, we need to break it up. Let's give the Jews their own country again. Let's give them back what they've always had. And let's do something else with a big chunk of land called Jordan. The whole thing was called Transjordan at the time, okay? So he explained that at that time there were no Palestinian people. The host of the question asked him this question. The host of the show asked him this question. He said, the host says, Mr. Historian, he said, there's always been this historical struggle over Palestine, and a bunch of people wanted to rule it. How did the aspirations to rule affect the Palestinian existence of the Palestinians' options and the Palestinians' possibilities of development? The historian answered him. He responds, before the Balfour, he calls it the promise, the Balfour Declaration, when the Ottoman rule ended in 1917, Palestine's political borders as we know them today did not exist. And there was nothing called a Palestinian people with a political identity as we know today. Since Palestine's lines of administration stretched from the east to the west and included all of Jordan and southern Lebanon, and like all the people of the region, the Palestinians were liberated from the Turks. Remember, it was the Ottoman Empire. That's the Turks. Turkish people had actually taken it over. They were liberated from the Turkish rule and immediately moved to colonial rule under England, okay, without there ever being forming a Palestinian political people or identity. In other words, it never even existed after the Balfour Declaration. It didn't exist. It wasn't even in there, okay? And so that kind of shows where it comes from. Now, I'm going to show you a map. Here we go. We're going to back up. This is 1920 to 22. This was a map of what England held, what Britain held. They had territories all around the world. And so this is the Jordan River, right, going up through there, the Dead Sea, okay? Like, you know, right. English, come on, PJ, English. Sea of Galilee, thank you. I'm thinking of the name of it in Hebrew. All right. So this is the Jordan River. We're going right down through there, okay? And so this was the way they pictured dividing it. Look, this is the approximate boundary of the Jewish national home proposed by the Zionists in the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. It was right up the border, right up. It actually takes in entire, much bigger than it is even today. This part is Jordan. So as we go from there, we move forward, and this is actually how it got divided in 1922. This is reality. This is Transjordan, and this is Israel, okay? Divided right up the river, makes it easy. It's a good place to put a border. It's like the river, it's already there. We don't have to draw it, okay? Now, this is 1947, the United Nations, not Israel, not the Jews. The United Nations, the same people who's the worst enemy of Israel today, set this up this way. They said that these green parts are where the Arabs are going to live, since they've decided to stay there. And by the way, when they set this up, Israel said, all the Arabs that are living here, that want to stay living here, fine, no problem. Okay. The problem was a whole bunch of them left. Over 60% or 68% or something of them left because they didn't want to live with Jews. They were already there. So the dark part is the Jewish states. The green part is the Arab state. Okay. And then immediately after that, the day after that Israel was declared a nation, virtually all of the Muslim nations around them attacked them. And when they did, Israel defended themselves. And so it got redrawn this time because now we're dealing with this is Palestine after the Arab-Israeli War of 48 and 49. Okay, so after that, and after they redrew the lines, this is how they drew it, okay? And again, this became Jordan. It's no longer known as Transjordan. Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Remember who's from Arabia? The Arabs, that's where they're from, okay? Jordanians are from Jordan. Israelis are from Israel, okay? And so we still have this green area here. That is called West Bank, and that's where the Arabs live, okay? Now, 48. In 1967, Egypt, I don't remember who all was involved, to be honest with you. Again, several of the nations, Israel, Egypt, in the 67, Egypt and Syria, anybody else? Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Okay, so Egypt, and Sinai Peninsula is part of Egypt. Syria, Jordan, was Arabia in it? They're probably all in it, they always are. They attacked them, they're going to run them into the sea. Once again, Israel, a little tiny place, there's enough of these people to eat them, defended itself, and in the process, pushed them all the way back. In fact, captured the entire Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. Just freaked out Egypt. I mean, Egypt's this giant country, and the first thing they know, this little tiny country is just taking over a place in their country that's bigger. It's like, we thought we were beating you guys, and here you've taken a big chunk of our country. They did give it back, like, okay, we're going to make nice with you, we're going to give it back, okay? Okay, and they captured the Golan Heights up here. You hear about the Golan Heights, and they kept part of that. They gave part of it back, and they captured all of Israel, and this area here. So they captured everything. Israel has never attacked anybody, contrary to what you hear. The only wars they've been in was when they were attacked. Every time they were attacked by a major entity, they not only defeated them, they took the land. So normally if you're attacked by somebody and you have to step into their territory to create a place of peace, that's fair game. They attacked you, unless you're Israel. Okay. This is a modern map of Israel. This is what Israel looks like right now. The green, so we still got this area called the West Bank, and all these green areas in Gaza. See the green? That's where the Arab Muslims live. That's where their cities are. That's where they live. Okay? These are the people who want to control the whole nation, the whole state. You know, like, why? This is your cities right here. These are your cities. Okay? Now, they've been wanting to have their own country. Of course, their goal has always been just to hold all of Israel, run all the Jews out. We want it all. I mean, that's fair, right? This is actually what they control. Now, I want you to look really close. The next picture is going to be what was proposed by the current administration, and also working with Jordan and working with Egypt and working with these other Arab countries. They said, you know what? You want your own country? Here it is. We're not only going to give you the areas that you control. Look, that's the areas they control. That's where their cities are. Look, they got every bit of it. We're not only going to give you that, we're going to give you the Gaza Strip. You get the Gaza Strip. But what's this other stuff? Look, right now they don't have anything down here in the Negev. This is called the Negev, right next to Egypt, which is, they could trade real easily with Egypt if you had a place. Look what else they're getting. There's like an economic zone there. There's like, these are specifically set up. There's travel set up so they can travel uninhibited through their entire territory. Okay, that was part of it. Big tunnel here. So they can travel through the entire territory of this new Palestinian nation without having to deal with Israel. Okay, so it's like it's connected with tunnels and roads and whatever. Okay, so they got their own roads and also they're like an independent. And this is where they are. Plus, they're being given even more land. Okay, what do they say? Well, yeah, sounds good to us, right? No. So, but I want you to see. I'm like, you got to get this. This is where they are today. This is what they're being offered. This is where they are. This is what they won't take. It's almost doubling their territory. Oh, no. What do they want? That's what we want. That's what they say. That's what we want. We want 100% of it. This is what the so-called Palestinians, this is the lie. They're telling the Palestinian people, you used to own this. Show me anywhere in history they've never owned that. That's a ridiculous lie. And then they go, well, and then, this happened, and we attacked them, and the UN gave them this. And then we attacked them again, and we got this, and now they want us to take this? Actually, this isn't even this is actually what they have today, what they're being offered. They're ignoring what they're actually being offered, and they don't even have this. Their cities aren't that big. What they're being offered is based on actual cities that actually exist, and they're trying to give them that, which is actually in the territories around it, but they won't take it. Because their goal, 100% or nothing. Okay. So the lie here's a problem, and this is the lie that's being told to the Arabs around the world. I'm just about truth. Look, I'm just about truth. This is history. I mean, if you're Muslim, you've been lied to. Look it up in the history book. Don't look in a Muslim Islamic history book. Look in a secular history book from Egypt, from anywhere, from the Middle East that's not been compromised. Look in something from 1910 or something, before this was an issue. And so not only is the Arab world being told this lie, but our world is being told this lie over the internet. They're being proposed that this is what's going on, and it's simply not true. And it frustrates me that our young people in schools are not being told the truth about this, because it's not politically correct to talk about it. We talk about it because we just talk about it. So here's some facts. Y'all ready? Israel became a nation in 1312 BC, which is 2,000 years before the rise of Islam. In 1967, the Arab refugees in Israel started calling themselves Palestinian people, which is over 20 years after the modern state of Israel was recognized by the United Nations. The United Nations is trying to attack them today because there's so many Muslim nations in there. Okay, so they've just kind of taken control of it. In fact, the founder of Islam, Muhammad, who dictated the Quran, wasn't even born until 570 AD, which is over 570 AD, which is over 500 years after Christ died. It's like they have no history there, okay? And it's contrary to all the claims. The Jewish conquest in 1272 BC, the Jews have had domination over the land for over 1,000 years. They've had a continuous presence in the land of Israel for the past 3,300 years. It's documented in secular history. It's documented in biblical history. It's all over, and the only Arab dominion was in a short period lasted about 22 years in 635 when they first took it over. After that, the Turks took it from them. The Turks aren't Arab. Okay? The only source, for example, that says that Yeshua did not die on the cross anywhere in history or anywhere is actually the Quran. But the Quran doesn't claim to be an eyewitness because it can't be, because it was written 500 years later. There was a Muslim cleric recently, I'm quoting him, not me. He was being interviewed by Ravi Zechariah, and his quote was, he said, "I believe it's time for Muslims," this is a Muslim cleric, he said, "I think it's time for Muslims to stop asking if Jesus died on the cross and start asking why he died." I think that's where we are in history. I think everybody's there in history. The Jews are there in history. The Christians are there in history. The Muslims are there in history. It's time for all of us to step away from the lies. We've all been taught lies. The Bible says this day will happen. It says there will come forth a people who said, "Surely our fathers have inherited lies." And that's what's happened to all of us. We know where we've come from. We've inherited lies historically. And so we live in a very special day where God is setting truth. You've got in your hand right now a device that can access truth if you're willing to look at it. It can also access pure garbage and demonic stuff if you're willing to look at it. So we've been put in an incredible situation where we have choice like nobody's ever had in history, to see truth and step into that truth, or ignore the truth and believe the garbage. The question is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Amen?